the night. Anna wasn't able to be with us last month, but she's going to give us a Ukraine update. And I know, like the rest of you, I'm very, very interested to hear what Anna's got to say.
Okay, thank you so much for having me. I'm sorry about last month. There was a little bit of a kerfuffle, but now I'm here, and first I have to say I'm sorry I have to be here and talk about this. Not that I have to be here, but to talk about this because there's no end in sight yet, so to speak. That I think is the first conclusion of this war. This is got entrenched and it's going on, and there's no end in sight. So the world have to, and especially we in the Western world and Ukraine, we have to start kind of really planning for this long term, so to speak. This is going to be a conflict that is not going to. It will take a lot of effort to solve, and it will be an ongoing effort, so to speak. But it's and please interrupt me with questions. And Fran, can you kind of keep an eye on if I miss someone that wants to ask a question or something? So I'm not just having a huge long monologue here, so to speak, because I want to be able to answer all the questions and stuff that you might have, so to speak. But let's start with a little bit about the situation in on the field, because now I get the sense that in most media, and especially in American media, it's starting to fall on the wayside. We don't hear that much about Ukraine because there is not that much newsworthy things that is happening, so to speak. And that is both good and bad, I think. It's the conflict in initial stage was about shock and awe, and Russia was rolling in, and it was more like a cat and mouse on the tactical side on the battlefield. The Russians sent in columns of tanks, and the little brave Ukrainians was running around, scurrying around with their little anti-tank weapons and blowing them up and stuff. So there you have the cat and mouse on the tactical side. That has now, and then we turned into a kind of a war of attrition. Everybody was shooting as much artillery round at each other, just trying to blow each other physically, literally, and financially to bits before the other side. Now we're getting into yet a new phase of the war, so to speak, because both sides, especially even Russia, realized they can't shoot 60, 80,000 artillery rounds per day. They can't manufacture, they can't logistically handle that, so they had to scale down. And the war has now gone from first the initial running around just trying to capture everything, and then attrition, to now become a strategic cat and mouse game. Now it's both sides trying to outsmart each other of where to strike next, because both sides are so depleted in resources, they can only do real impact and get local superiority in numbers and resources to advance or to hold the other side at bay, so to speak, in certain areas. So they have to they can't be everywhere. Not even Russia can be everywhere. So they have to try and outsmart each other on a strategic level. And that game is very, very different. So and there's primarily two areas in the Ukraine that are interesting. Donbas in the east, that has been on the radar and the main focus of the war for over 2 months now. But now it's starting to shift towards Kherson in the south. And Ukraine's trying to retake part of an area that Russia took the very earliest days of the war. The first day of the war, Russia just rolled in, took the only big city they have actually been able to conquer since the 2014 when they started the war. They took the Luhansk and Donetsk in the east and held them, but they haven't taken any other big city in this offensive, in this war, part of the war, but except for Kherson. And now they're being threatened to be kicked out. We haven't seen yet. And the thing is that the Kherson it's on the north side of the Dnieper River. And that means that they are vulnerable. And the Ukrainians, thanks to now getting artillery that they can now shoot longer range than the Russians can, using the American and Western European 155 millimeter artillery, but especially the MLRS and HIMARS that are missile rocket artillery that can reach 80, 100 miles or even more in some instances. So meaning they can be in safe distance and they can shoot precision guided munitions, not just they're shooting very few missiles and very few rockets and very few grenades, but they can hit with almost pinpoint precision. They can hit even a single building. They can hit a bridge that is only like 30 feet wide. They can hit that when they can hit certain parts of a bridge even. And that means that Ukrainians can now isolate the Russia, the units that are on the northern side. And Kherson is a big city. It's like 300, 400,000 inhabitants. So it's a fairly big city, and the Russians having it. But the problem is that all their supply lines are now effectively cut off. They have to build temporary pontoon bridge across a river that is 400 yards wide, or sometimes even more. And the thing is that the Ukrainians can shoot these pontoon bridges to bits too. So it used, now Russia is in for a taste of their own medicine, so to speak. So the Ukrainians are starting to starve out. We haven't seen it yet. It will take weeks, maybe a month for it to really affect. But my guesstimate is that Russia will face defeat in Kherson. And it will take a month, and Ukraine is going to take it slow and gentle, because we have to realize Ukraine can't just oust them using a lot of force. First of all, that will cost human lives of their own forces, they don't have the resources. But more importantly, there are still maybe 100,000 civilian Ukrainians in the area. And there is also all the Ukrainian infrastructure, meaning all their houses, all the public buildings, all the schools and all that. And the Ukrainians don't want to destroy their own infrastructure, and they don't want to shell their own population, which means that they have to be very delicate in how they do it. So instead, they're knocking out Russian ammo depots, and they're knocking out the supply lines for Russia, and then simply waiting for the soldiers to be ineffective, and the vehicles to run out of fuel and all that, so to speak. So it's the same game that the Russians played against you remember in Mariupol a month to 6-8 weeks ago, when the Russians were starving out the last Ukrainian defenders in Mariupol. Now Ukraine will do the same in Kherson, probably. And since the Ukraine will now get more and more Western weapons with longer reach and higher precision, that means that they can do this. And Russia seems to not have the resources to fight back. And then it becomes that Russia only have one chance to counter this, and that's to take a significant amount of forces from Luhansk and Donetsk and the whole Donbas area, bringing them south, and then try to counter it by basically going inside Ukraine, north of the Dnieper River. But that's risky. That means go several hundred miles alongside Ukrainian forces, alongside on an isolated strip where they have Ukraine on one side and the river on the other side. That's military suicide. When Ukraine start having a lot more and more artillery, precision guided weapons that they can knock out bridges, because there are small bridges. When you have to take trucks and tanks and stuff on hundreds of miles of road next to an enemy, they can't really do it. So the Russians are probably going to lose in the south. That's my guesstimate. But it will take maybe a month, 6 weeks, 8 weeks. It will be a slow death for them, or not literal, but hopefully not literal, because I don't want the Russian soldiers to die from this. I just want them to be combat ineffective, so to speak. But that's my guess when it comes to that. I think is the biggest military thing that is going on, and we will see the war. Thankfully, the war generally all over the Ukraine has diminished some. Russia is still doing the occasional missile attack out of the blue. They're sending artillery strikes, but they're running out of ammunition, especially long-term ammunition. And there is also now another thing. Ukraine has got more and more modern air defenses there, and that means that Russia can basically they're being denied the aerial superiority. So they can't even send in aerial attacks anymore. So they have to send cruise missiles with really long distance. And they don't want to waste those few because they still have to maintain the preparedness to go to war with NATO if need be. So that means that they will hold back on all those resources. And that means that you will see in the press that there will be the occasional pot shot basically at Kiev and even Lviv and other places. But that's terrible for people that end up on the receiving end. But it's not a threat to Ukraine as a whole. Ukraine is big enough to swallow a few of these attacks at time spent, but they are fewer and fewer. You don't see that many reports anymore, and there's like 1 or 2 a day. It used to be 30 a day, And now that I think is a sure sign that Russia is running out of ammo and the ability to make new ones too, because a lot of the technology in there is something they're being denied, so to speak. So any questions on the kind of the actual battlefield, so to speak?
Anna, can you give us an update on what's going on for admission to NATO for Sweden?
Sure.
And and keeping them, and also add any comments that evidently we have some Republican congressmen and senators, whatever, that don't support admission of Sweden to NATO.
Mm-hmm. Yep. Yeah. Sweden and Finland are now what they call entries, or they are now non-voting candidate members. That means that they have access to all the information. They are sitting on all the boards. Their officers are integrated into NATO, and so operatively they are now a member of NATO, but they are not allowed to vote on new proposals and treaties and stuff like that. That's the situation on the ground. So militarily, Finland and Sweden are now integrated into NATO, and they were already so close partners that was happened overnight, so to speak. But then it comes to the political process of bringing them up to become statutory members of the alliance, and that means that now every parliament in every country, that are all the 30 countries that are members, have to ratify the new treaty between NATO and Sweden and Finland. And that means all of them. And I think that has already begun. There are probably a few countries that have, but it's the summer times are usually when there's recess in almost all the parliaments have a recess right now. So I think in August that will begin, and in 29 of the 30 countries it will be a non-issue. That it will happen. Hungary might put up a little bit of yelling and screaming, and then they will do it. And then but then you have Turkey, and that's the question. Erdogan, he wants to put in a wrench, so I just assume that sometime in August, September, when he feels like he's not being heard enough and he needs some popular support at home and he wants some international media time, he will start saying that, no, I'm not going to do it. And the debate we had in May before the meeting will start all over again, because Erdogan, he's like Trump. He wants the attention. He's a narcissist, and he will try everything to get it. So I assume that we can go months before that happens, so to speak. But militarily, that doesn't change anything really. Finland and Sweden is already practically members, so to speak. Oh yeah, Teresa. Yep.
Thank you. I have a question. Is China helping with the arms to Russia, or have they bailed? Do you know how?
No, yeah, it's interesting. The Chinese and the Russians are frenemies, which is kind of interesting. And there's another aspect to this, because when it comes to China, used to rely on Russia for military technology. Up until very recently, they basically bought everything wholesale from Russia. And Russia was very willing to sell to China because China was their biggest import market to sell to. And China bought lots of it. The problem is that China bought it for 10, 15, 20 years, and then they copied it, and then they made their own versions that were better than the Russians. So China was already deep into the process of weaning themselves off Russian technology, that military hardware technology. So in that sense, Russia and Xi Jinping and Putin likes each other because they're both totalitarians. They understand each other, just like Trump likes to talk to Putin. Xi Jinping likes to talk to Putin because they get along and they can strike so-called deals, and they understand each other, I think, from an emotional, moral standpoint. They both talk about strengths, spheres of interest and stuff like that. It's they talk the same language and have the same type of feelings. And also they have the same enemies, and that's really important in politics, and that becoming more and more important. But we also have to realize that China is in the role of want to have strategic leadership, and they want to build integration with the rest of the world. We've heard about the Belt and Roads Initiative for 15, 20 years now. China's enormous project of investing $600 billion for over a decade, and $600 billion in the next decade in building roads and train and train tracks and airports, ports, and so on, over a vast number of countries. So they can, and the idea for China was to integrate trade-wise with Europe, and to be able to sell to Europe and ship to Europe, and then import stuff from Europe as a way of shielding themselves from American wrath and getting control of Central Asia and so on. The problem is that Central Asia is Russians' backyard. So that was kind of a strategic, that they were competing over the same territory and economic sphere of interest and stuff. So Russia and China are strategically partners, but they are also enemies and competing. We have to remember that it was not that many decades ago that Russia and China were at war with each other. There were two communist countries that hated each other, detested each other. So I think it's more a marriage of necessity rather than love. And we also have to realize now that the Ukraine war and Russia's actions and Putin's actions, because they are really Putin's actions, have put a wrench in the Belt and Road Initiative, meaning China have invested $100 billion, $200 billion, maybe even 300 by this far. And Ukraine sits around the Black Sea, where all these, everything from pipelines to ports and all that's putting a wrench in it. And trade with Europe is now at a minimum. And it's going down more and more, and we in the West become, so this have changed the whole strategic outlook for the world have changed. And a lot of people don't realize this is huge in every big country, and every small countries are just forced to change. But the big countries like India, China, stuff, they have it's a new world order that is, it's at stake. Things are changing, and you have to start looking at who do you want to have partner with when it comes to things like economy and building your weapon systems, your supply and computer chips and stuff like that. Look at Biden's administration, meaning Biden, and he's doing a really good job at this. He's now launching new initiative, American initiative, together with Europe, Canada, Japan, Australia, to say, come and partner with us. And we can guarantee these supply routes. We have the military resources to defend the seaways and stuff, and especially to reach out. That's the talk of pivot to Asia that started during the Obama years. That was to counter this. That was Obama's way of understanding the world, to realize that that was the Pacific Partnership Treaty was a way to counter China and their way of organizing trade around them, to organizing around the Western world and our values. And now we get a second chance. And Biden is not talking about it because trade negotiations and trade deals are kind of toxic in America, but he's actually doing it. He's reaching out and building alliances with Indonesia, with Japan, with the Philippines, with Australia, with Japan, South Korea, to outmaneuver China at its own game. And those, I must, my hat off. He is amazing at building long-term alliances. So if we get, hopefully, a Democrat successor to the Biden administration that can continue this work, that might lead to security and stability for another 50 years or more.
Wow.
So there is always an opportunity. Every crisis has an opportunity, and Russia has, to say blunt, fucked up so badly that this has given us an enormous opportunity to do things right if we take it, so to speak. And right now, I think we are doing, especially the Biden administration, are doing a really good job. They're pumping in $2, $3, $4, $5 billion into the Ukrainian economy to keep the war effort and the civilian society running. And we are actually able to do it, and we're doing a decent job. We're not perfect by any means, and we should do a little bit more. Especially Europe should do more. America, we are doing our part here. It's Europe that needs to ramp up, especially Germany. But they are getting there, slowly getting there. So that was my take on it. But the war is more important for America perspective on the global scene that most Americans realize.
Oh,
I think.
that's interesting. Thank you.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So
Very
that Oh, thank you. Yeah. So that is one thing. And then I always, I have a tendency, since I'm Swedish, to paint Erdogan as a sort of villain, so to speak. But I also have to give Erdogan some cred here, because Erdogan he's a narcissist, and he's kind of a guy that wants to decide everything. But sometimes they get things right too. And we have to say, we have to give Erdogan a little bit of cred, because he actually was the one that facilitated the deal that even Russia signed on. So now we have the first grain transport left the harbor of Odessa a few days ago, and is now on its way to Lebanon. And no one was shooting at it so far. And if there is more coming that way, then we have to give Erdogan some cred, because he's the one that can talk to Putin too. So Erdogan is a pain, and he is a pain in the butt and all that, and causes problem, but he's also an asset at times. So to have a maverick like Erdogan might be useful at times in war like this too, because he's one of the few leaders can actually talk to both sides.
Yeah, they were talking about a horrible famine occurring because of the blockade of grain.
Yes, it is, because Ukraine feeds almost 500 million people just with its agricultural products, and especially people in the Middle East and parts of Africa are really dependent on Ukrainian grain and other products like cooking oil and fertilizer and stuff like that. And the compounding problem is that Russia is one of the other big exporters of foodstuff. So we get the double whammy of both Ukraine and Russia being kind of off the market, so to speak. And that will it will not lead that people would need to starve from an actual level, because we have enough food in the world to go around. The problem is that the price will go up so much. And that means that there will be, because China is buying up as much as they can, both for to secure their own food supply, but also to put in a wrench in the market, so to speak. And so Xi Jinping he's always long-term thinking. And you buy it up, you can kind of control the markets, and that way you can be. So China wants to raise the price. So countries like Sudan and Nigeria and many others will be really in the doldrum and will be begging for food. And then they can be the nice contributor and sell it for below market price and don't pay anything and get the political cred for it, so to speak. So those are things that China is very, very adept at doing, so to speak, and they're doing it right now. So, and have been doing for some time. But that, again, war are opportunities. That's one of the reasons they unfortunately happen from time to time, because they shake things up. And when you do, you can always grab more power or something like that. That's why we've had wars I think one of the main reasons we had war throughout history. So and to understand what's going on and why it needs to go on, you need to talk about those aspects too, even if they're disgusting from a moral standpoint.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Aaliyah has a question.
Yeah, I was interested in Hey, hi Anna.
Hey.
We know that Russia rose to power. Part of the reason was the oil and gas, right? I mean, they invested heavily, they started drilling, and then Europe started relying on them and other countries as well. So do you know what the situation is now? Is that why we're seeing the higher gas prices here as well? There is a dent. Are we putting a dent in Russia?
Oh yeah, that's one of the main points that I haven't gotten to yet. But let's dig into it, because it's in Europe can look forward to a dark and cold winter, because Russia is strangling Europe when it comes to gas. It's both sides are playing the same game here, meaning Russia is reducing the amount of gas it sends to Europe in order to punish Europe, and Europe is saying we're going to buy less and less Russian gas in order to punish Russia. So both sides are punishing each other. And that means that Europe has to pay much higher price for gas, because they have to import liquid natural gas, and it needs to be sent through the the transportation cost is much higher. They have to buy it in a market. That means that there are fewer suppliers in the market, so there's less of it, so price goes up. But that is less of a problem for Europe, because Europe is rich enough that they can outspend almost anyone else for gas. So it's not, meaning Germany and a bunch of other countries, they have enough money. They can borrow some more money or tax their population just a little bit and buy the gas. So in this sense, it's logistics and actual storage capacity and the capacity for the gas to literally be piped to the cities and towns and industries and households that needs it. And the problem is that a lot of that infrastructure, especially in a few countries like Russia, like Germany, Italy, Bulgaria and Hungary and Romania, are dependent on gas flowing from Russia, because that's how they built the network. It's much cheaper to build a pipeline to one supplier than it is to, meaning if you double it and build another pipeline, then someone will say, what the heck do I have to pay so much more to get on the gas network just because someone needs to have a pipeline going in that direction as well, when the first one can serve me. So it's a way of making it effective in peacetime, and that now comes back and hurts you in wartime. And so now it's both sides try to out-hurt each other. And in this sense, that means that Europe will be strangled by high prices and probably even rationing in some places. Germany have had a very interesting experiment that has run now in July and will run in August too. They have lowered the prices on all public transport in the whole country down to a bare minimum. It's like €9 per month. You can go anywhere inside the whole country on buses, subways, and regional trains, not the fast, the high-speed trains across, but everything else, all the buses, the tram lines, and all that. €9 and you go anywhere across all over Germany. People love it. And the trains and stuff buses are jam-packed with people that within these high fuel prices. And the interesting effect is that have lowered demand and consumption of diesel and a whole bunch of stuff like that. And that meant that they have been able to save on that, and they bought even less on the market. So it's good for the environment. So that has been a huge success. But the problem is that you can't really do that when it comes to heating houses. And there's also like chemical industries and stuff like that who are dependent on natural gas. They will starve, and that will cause some disruptions. And that means that, for instance, fertilizer and a lot of industrial chemicals will be in short supply or maybe even or higher prices, and they might not even be available because production might end, so to speak, this winter. So that is the big thing. But it also means that Russia is running out of money fast. And Putin is saying that, our economy doing so well. You should know, every time Putin says that economy goes well, you know it's going down the drain. And Russia is doing very, very badly. There's a lot of signs more and more that Russia is doing really bad, so to speak. And they're banning more and more media. They're throwing out more and more companies. So Russia is literally diminishing in the world and literally and figuratively disappearing from the world. And it's going really, really fast. And also its recognition. Putin is now have been on a diplomatic tour of goodwill and stuff. He's been to Iran begging for weapons. Can you imagine that Russia goes to other parts of the world to beg for weapons and ammunition and soldiers? And that is interesting. Going to several countries just to do it. And he's been kind of made a fool of himself. He had to stand in front of international press for a couple of minutes waiting for Erdogan. That was Erdogan's way of telling who's the boss. And that was so much bad press. He had to stand there and look like a village fool for 5 minutes before Erdogan came and saved him, so to speak. Those are things that there's been many times when he kind of fumbled around and he holding on to things for dear life and stuff like that. And for Russia, these things have been, meaning Putin would never put himself in those risky positions if it weren't absolutely necessary. So Russia is begging for every scraps they can get, so to speak, and it's starting to get really troublesome for them.
Any other questions?
Yeah, and I have a couple of little anecdotes to end this
Okay.
with, if we don't have
Okay.
any more questions. So we have the first. There was the Russian Navy celebrated its Fleet Day a few days ago, and in Sevastopol military harbor, the naval base in Sevastopol, there was a drone attack that blew up some empty buildings and stuff like that. And I was like, oh, at first I was like, oh, wow, now the Ukrainians are really on the offensive, because that's like striking Pearl Harbor or something. It's like that you don't do it lightly. There's more air defenses and whatnot, and it's a strategic. It's Murmansk and Sevastopol and Vladivostok. Russia has 3 naval bases that are really, really critical, and Kaliningrad will be a fourth. So fourth, and Sevastopol is one of them that Russia would defend bitterly to the end, so to speak, and to have an attack. And then we looked at it and stuff, and they was reported it was like a homemade little drone and stuff. So I don't know this, but my guess is that Russia staged it themselves because there were no deaths or anything like that, just a little bit material destruction, and it was probably a self-made attack so they could play the victim card, which I think is really important, because always remember this, that authoritarians and stuff, they always want to blame someone else for all their hardship, and they always portray they have their feel, and they always want to play the victim card. I'm the victim of this. Woman is oppressing me or treating me badly, whatever it is. I think it's a way for Russia and Putin to play this card. And I don't think Ukraine would attack Sevastopol. And if they did, they wouldn't attack it that way. And they would certainly not attack it the day when it's full of civilians who want to go there on a parade looking at things. No, they will wait until it was like nighttime or something, where they will strike when there will be less observed and there will be less civilian casualties. But on the other hand, when it comes to things that we can look out for, if you ever see that the Ukrainian attack the Kerch bridge, that's the bridge that goes from the Crimean Peninsula over to the south to the Russian. That's a bridge that Russia built after they took over Crimea. They built it to connect to the Russian mainland. If the Ukrainians would ever attack it, then the Ukraine are getting really offensive. If they blow up and even make a hint at attacking that bridge, I've been waiting for that for weeks to see if the Russians. So if you see that in media, that there is an attack against the Kerch bridge between Crimea and Russia, then you know that Ukraine is on offensive. Then they are brave and will do something. And I wouldn't be surprised if we see them blow a hole in that bridge in the next month or 6 weeks or something like that. They are on the offensive, and they start getting the tools to do that job. And so they might, for instance, convert one of their Harpoon anti-ship missiles to strike at the bridge, maybe not to knock it out, just to scare the bejesus out of the Russians and to force them to be scared, so to speak, because it won't hurt that many civilians, and it will be it's a juicy target, so to speak, to strike at. So that is one of the things that I think we should look out for. So when you say it might not go into media, so we have to talk about it, but it's one of these kind of, I think, trigger events that will tell a lot about what might happen. And then there was a report about 100 or so Ukrainian prisoners of war that had been killed or died or something in Russian care like a week ago, I think it was, or 10 days or something. And that was something that the Russians, of course, wanted to blame and said, no, the Ukrainians blew up the prison camp and killed all the 100 prisoners. And that, no, that's horribly enough. I think it was the Russians who simply butchered them all just because they didn't want any witnesses to what happened. And they were scared that the International Red Cross and others, eventually they would have to release the Ukrainians, and they will come in and talk in front of camera and accuse. So that was probably Russia simply killing witnesses to their own foul deeds, so to speak. So which is absolutely disgusting behavior. But I think that was the horrible, and again shows that they yeah, even in war there should be some sort of basic decency, and Russia has shown yet again that they don't seem to follow even basic decency. So those were the main, yeah, my main points, so to speak, that coming up.
Fascinating.
Thank you,
Thank you
Anna.
very much. Yeah.
Yeah, that's, you know, a lot of it is really bad news, but it seems like there might be some glimmers of hope.
Yeah, if we keep giving Ukraine this level of support, hopefully even more going forward, Ukraine can actually win this. It's winnable for the Ukraine. If they manage to kick the Russia out of Kherson, then that will be a first big, and then wait. Now it's summer, warfare is a lot easier. Wait until November hits, and things are getting nasty and cold, and logistics become 3-4 times more difficult. Everything's get muddy again, and then it freezes over. And remember Germany in World War II? This is where they get stuck and mauled down, so to speak. And it might be that Russia have to suffer through the same thing. And Ukraine still has home field advantage, and with more Western technology, that means, and the other good thing with this is that Western weapons makes it possible for them to fight the war with less of attacks on civilians, less destruction of infrastructure and stuff like that, because they're weapons with that means that fewer soldiers have to be in harm's way, and it also means more precision, and those are in situations like this, that's actually a good fortune, so to speak. And we also get a chance to make sure that we can battle test our latest weapons. So that is a good opportunity. We can make sure that they actually work against prime targets and in a full war environment, so to speak, which I think it's also from that perspective a really good one important other reason why we should help Ukraine fight this war, because then we don't have to do it, and we can learn from it without having to put that many soldiers in the field in harm's way.
That's great. Thanks for coming and giving us your updated report, and hopefully you'll come again next month.
Sure. Thank you.
Yeah,
Thank
that's
you.
great.